Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Burgh Breakdown, your spot for all things Pittsburgh sports. This is episode 2, and before we get into episode 2, just want to send a quick thank you to everybody that has tuned in to this point. I am elated to see the response that this show is getting because at the end of the day, I'm just on here having fun, talking about 3 teams that I have a deep appreciation for, and the fact that so many of you tuned in to the first episode means so much to me. So thank you guys so much for all the support on episode 1. Hopefully we can keep this going as we get beyond episode 2 and into what could be a very interesting fall for Pittsburgh sports. Not just the Pittsburgh Pirates, who we'll talk about first, but the Pittsburgh Steelers and of course the Pittsburgh Penguins, who still have some potentially big moves just kind of in the distance, but still something that you can see. Unless, of course, you're covered by smoke right now, like most of the East Coast. But let's kick things off with the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I promise not every episode is going to be Pirates, Steelers, Penguins. The order is going to switch depending upon, what team is 1 in season and 2 making the biggest headlines or has the conversation that I want to get to the most. But as of right now, if you're a Pittsburgh sports fan, the Pittsburgh Pirates are dominating headlines. For 1, they're the only team in season, and for 2, they're as good or better than they have been in a decade. It's been nice over this past week to be able to just sit back and enjoy the fact that the Pirates swept not only a division team, but one of the better teams in baseball. So we've been able to sit back and enjoy that for now 6, 7, 8 days at this point from Saturday's doubleheader win up until this point on Friday. But it's time to put that in the past because the Pittsburgh Pirates are entering a massive few weeks where, based on the schedule in front of them, they could climb the standings very, very quickly and all of a sudden find themselves in a playoff spot by the time the trade deadline rolls around at the beginning of August. As of right now, the Pirates have a 50-47 record, which is the first time that the Buccos have been above 500 at the All-Star break since 2016. It's been a decade since they have put themselves in this position. And still, because they're in, of course, the harder of the 2 leagues this year, they are 2 games out of a playoff spot. But that could all change over the next couple of weeks. In fact, that could change over the next week because the first road trip out of the All-Star break is kind of favorable for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I know what you're saying, Nick. They're playing 2 current playoff teams of the American League, and they're playing on the road. Yes, I understand. They're playing at the Cleveland Guardians this weekend, and then next week, midweek, they'll be taking on the New York Yankees up at Yankee Stadium. But if you look at the Pirates this year, they've been very good, not just slightly good. They've been very good against the American League. 16-8 overall this season. They have a series record of 6-2, not to mention the fact that they are 9-3 in their last 12 games played against the American League and have won 4 consecutive series that they've matched up with somebody in interleague play. I look at the Guardians series, I look at the Yankees series, and yes, they're both sitting in wild card spots in the American League, but it feels like, especially as we'll get to with the rotation reset, that the Pirates are in a really good position to, at the very least, go 500 on this road trip. And if they're able to go 500 on this road trip, then they're able to kind of set the table for what's going to be a really big next homestand. And we'll get to that in a minute. But I feel like we're going to see a little bit better than that. I mean, you look at some of the series in which the Pirates have been able to win against the American League this year. The Twins are right outside a playoff spot in the AL. Pirates swept them. I get it was a PNC, but the Pirates swept them at PNC Park. The Mariners are a team that's right on the cusp of being a playoff team in the AL, and the Pirates took it to them 2 games out of 3 at PNC Park. The Pirates also had a really good series against the Houston Astros. The Pirates also had a really good series against the Sacramento Athletics, where they were able to win the series despite practically not showing up in game number one. The Pirates play the AL very well. If they were 8 games over 500 against the NL, they'd be one of the best teams in baseball, if not the best team in baseball. That's where they stand against American League opponents. And that's why I think starting with two AL teams that are not the cream of the crop, but are still very good teams in the AL is a good way to get the Pirates to just come out of this break, guns a-blazing, and try to get some momentum before a very, very big homestand that's on the horizon. But let's finish off a conversation quickly about this first road trip. Something everybody's talking about right now is the rotation reset that the Pittsburgh Pirates did throughout this All-Star break. It'll be Jared Jones on Friday night, then it'll be Braxton Ashcraft on Saturday, and Paul Skeens on Sunday. 4 to 5 is going to be either Bubba Chandler, then Mitch Keller, or Mitch Keller, then Bubba Chandler. I'm intrigued to see kind of what they do with that once they get to Yankee Stadium. But a lot of people are saying it's about just pushing Mitch Keller back and just moving him to the end of the rotation and just biding their time while they try to figure out something to do with Mitch Keller. I think that that's part of it, but I think that's not one of the main reasons that they made this rotation reset. I think, for one, we've heard Paul Skeens say that he doesn't like to get off schedule. Mark DeRosa, who was the head coach of Team USA at the World Baseball Classic, was on Pat McAfee's show the day of the Home Run Derby, and he essentially said Paul Skeens had come to us during the World Baseball Classic and said, just please don't ever make me pitch on 7 days rest. I don't want to go that long. I want to make sure I stay on rotation. You have to think that's playing a factor here too. Paul Skeens started last Sunday. He was off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. He's not going to want to wait till Sunday or Monday of next week. He's going to want to get back on schedule as soon as humanly possible. So you'd have to imagine that that is a big reason as to why they shuffled the rotation the way they did. And secondly, the reason that, I might be big braining this, but the reason that I look at is to set up the following homestand. Because yes, you're playing a couple of pretty difficult teams in the Guardians and the Yankees, but as I mentioned earlier, the Pirates have been very good against the American League, specifically on the offensive side of the ball. They've been really good against the American League. But the next homestand is against the Chicago Cubs, who are right now in one of the 3 wild card spots the Pirates are eyeing up, and the Arizona Diamondbacks, who are just a half game behind the Pittsburgh Pirates. Because of this rotation reset, if it continues to go the way that we expect it to go, and they finish out with 4-5 and then start it over and keep it with Jones, Ashcraft, Skeens, and then whoever, that sets you up to have Braxton Ashcraft pitch twice in that very important homestand, and you get Paul Skeens. So 3 out of your 6 games against 2 teams that are fighting for similar spots in the National League, you have your best pitchers going half the time. Then you just need to really get one win from the other 3 starters, whether that be Jared Jones, who the Pirates, his numbers haven't been spectacular, but the Pirates seem to win a heck of a lot when Jared Jones starts, whether that's for reasons that have to deal with Jones or just a random fact. I believe they're 5-3 in Jared Jones starts. I'd have to double check that. But you need to win one game of Jared Jones, Bubba Chandler, who started to pitch very well going into the break. His last start against Milwaukee was one of his best starts of the year. And then Mitch Keller. You just need to win one of those 3, and all of a sudden that's a 4-2 homestand where you can climb closer to the Chicago Cubs and maybe create some space between you and the Arizona Diamondbacks, because that's what the Pirates need to be doing. They need to be chasing down people ahead of them while simultaneously being aware that there are a lot of teams directly behind them. The Washington Nationals, the Cincinnati Reds are a little bit further behind, but they can catch up in a matter of an instant because of how good their pitching is. They need to be able to create some separation from that mushy middle and try to get themselves to, frankly, where the Cubs are right now, which is in wild card 1 with a little bit of a buffer beneath them with wild card 2, 3, and then the rest of the National League. So I think that is a bigger reason. And again, maybe it's overthinking it. Maybe I'm just galaxy braining this, but I think that's a bigger reason for this reset, matched with, Paul Skeens essentially being like, I don't want to wait that long for my next start. I want to try to stay on turn as much as possible. more so than trying to figure out what to do with Mitch Keller. That is obviously a big storyline for the second half, but I don't think that that would cause them to completely reset their rotation the way they did. But let's talk a little bit before we move on to some Pittsburgh Steelers about that next homestand. I already mentioned, it feels like they're kind of lining up their starting pitchers to be able to give their best to that matchup against the Cubs, and then, of course, subsequently the D-backs. But it could be huge because we could see Spencer Horwitz back in the lineup. And in fact, we could see O'Neal Cruz back in the lineup. So we could see I won't want to say fully healthy because we still have Connor Griffin on the shelf. And when he's healthy, he's probably one of the 2 or 3 most impactful bats in the lineup. And that's a lot to say for a 20-year-old already, but he is. But the Pirates have still been a tremendous offense with these 3 huge names out. Could you imagine adding Spencer Horwitz back, adding those pimped out home runs that he does, and then adding O'Neal Cruz back, not only at the plate? I understand, as Merlin Valdez, we talked about him on the first episode of Burgh Breakdown, has been a revelation. He's been so good, and he needs to still find semi-regular at-bats, if not regular at-bats, when these 2 guys come back. He's been great. Jake Mangum's bat has hit, 350, 345 since O'Neal Cruz went down. He's been great. But the way that O'Neal Cruz can impact a baseball game at an instant, to get that back is massive. Not only that, while Jake Mangum has been fine and serviceable in center field, you can't substitute the range that O'Neal Cruz gives you. Yes, he gives you some mind-numbing mistakes, but sometimes he makes plays that look routine that I don't think he gets enough credit for because he's a freak of nature. He has rangy, limbs, and also he is extremely quick in the outfield. So getting that back should help the defense, in my opinion, which is huge as well. Horwitz is somebody who is probably closer to coming back, but let's not forget, last time Ben Cherington spoke, he said it's probably not going to be right after the All-Star break that you see O'Neal Cruz, but it's probably before the end of July. If we get through these 2 road series, it makes a lot of sense that against the Cubs, that's when we could potentially see O'Neal Cruz drawing back into the lineup. And then after that, there's just a 4-game set in Cincinnati, and you're at the trade deadline. So it could be a very quick sprint to the trade deadline where the Pirates could go from a team that's just on the periphery to a team that is in the thick of it, potentially in a playoff spot by the time the trade deadline comes around. And that's going to create a whole lot of conversation around Ben Cherington and what he's going to do. Mason Miller, anyone? I know I'd love to see it, but I don't know how realistic it is. Maybe that's a future segment on the Burgh Breakdown. Welcome back to the Burgh Breakdown. Thank you again so much for tuning into this episode. Pirates are, of course, the team of record right now in Pittsburgh. They are the only team in season, and that's the reason that they are typically going to be first on this show for the next couple of weeks. But I will say this. Pittsburgh Steelers now are just about 11 days from the day this comes out from showing up in Latrobe, Pennsylvania at training camp. I'm so excited for football season. I talked on Tuesday on the first episode that there are not many battles specifically for starting jobs. We talked about the right tackle battle and how Dylan Cook is the leader in the clubhouse, but Maxi Honachor could potentially catch up to him. We'll have to wait and see. But despite the fact that there's not many camp battles for starting roles, there are still plenty of storylines. I already mentioned Mike McCarthy on the first episode. We have the Joey Porter Jr. situation with his contract. What's going to happen with that? But to me, when you're looking on the field at training camp, you also have to specifically look for 2 players who are looking for a fresh start. 2 players that were drafted in pretty significant spots that are still trying to get their career off the ground at the NFL level. Let's start with Caleb Johnson. He is in his 2nd season after being a 3rd-round pick in the 2025 NFL draft. But if you look back at what he did in his rookie season, he's essentially starting from scratch. New offensive coordinator, new head coach, and really a new opportunity for him to impress a coaching staff and get back onto the field, because he was not great as a rookie. And I think I might be saying it a little lightly. He only had 28 rushing attempts. A lot of that was because he couldn't get on the field behind guys like Jaylen Warren, who was having a good season, and Kenneth Gainwell, who ended up being the Steelers' team MVP because he played so well that I don't even think the Steelers expected to get that much out of Kenneth Gainwell. But that matched with the fact that Caleb Johnson made some big mistakes early in the season. It was hard for him to see playing time. It was hard for him to build any momentum on Sundays because he couldn't get on the field. I mean, Mike Tomlin and Danny Smith, they tried to get him on the field by making him one of the kick returners, and then we saw what happened against the Seahawks. He botched it so bad that they potentially lost the game because of a play that he made where they could have, who knows, won a game against the eventual Super Bowl champions. So I look at Caleb Johnson, and it almost feels wrong to say, but it almost feels like it's do or die for him in just his second season in the National Football League. I mean, I don't think it's too early to say that. He was a third string last season. They lose Kenneth Gainwell because, like I said, he was miles better than anybody could have expected with the Steelers. And they immediately go out and replace Gainwell in the depth chart with Rico Dowdle, somebody who has a prior history with head coach Mike McCarthy. So going into this season, Caleb Johnson is in a very similar position that he was going into last season, where he's going to fight or have to fight for every opportunity that he gets, which is not going to be very much. Not only that, it doesn't feel like he's going to be battling for reps with Rico Dowdle, and Jaylen Warren. It feels like he's more going to be battling with Eli Heidenreich to be that number 3 running back on the roster. It feels like it's not him looking up, it's him fending off somebody that's coming in for the first time. And that's coming from a guy who was, what, a 7th round pick of the Pittsburgh Steelers in this previous draft. But you know what Eli Heidenreich does? He catches the football out of the backfield, which Caleb Johnson has not done well throughout his career, college or otherwise. And he plays special teams, which is going to be a big reason why Heidenreich's roster spot is probably more of a guarantee than Caleb Johnson holding on to that third running back spot. So it's a weird situation that this running back, who was touted as one of the best of a pretty good class coming into 2025 draft, is already potentially on the outs with his NFL organization, or at the very least, it feels that way. It feels like he needs to have a very impressive training camp to set the stage for a season that's not just another complete disaster for him. I still think that, and I said this when I was back on All Steelers Talk leading up to the draft that the Steelers took Caleb Johnson, he still feels like the prototypical Steelers running back. Like, he's big, he's burly, he can run physically, but he needs to be able to put all those tools together, and he needs to be able to do it a little bit quicker. I think that's the one thing that I took away overall when I watched him on the field. You take off Jaylen Warren, you take off Kenneth Gainwell, and it feels like you got so much slower at that position with Caleb Johnson. I understand he's never going to be as fleet of foot as a Jaylen Warren, but he needs to be able to kind of match the eye test of the speed of the NFL level. So that's one of the two players that I look at. I'm like, man, is it already do or die for him? And the other one technically is entering year 2, but realistically it's year 3, because Roman Wilson, while he did miss his entire rookie season with an injury, albeit he playing 5-10 snaps against the Las Vegas Raiders, he really didn't pick up any momentum. He really didn't make much of an impression. And then in year 2, he only played 33% of the snaps while being healthy all season long. Not only that, but he played 10 or fewer snaps in 5 of his 13 games played last year. It felt like early in the season, the Steelers were trying to build him up similar to how Mike Tomlin had built up rookies in the past. You get a couple opportunities early, and then once you succeed there, we'll give you more and more as the season goes on. They don't get thrown into the fire under Mike Tomlin in a lot of instances. Well, as time went on, it felt like Roman Wilson lost the trust of Aaron Rodgers. And that was kind of the kiss of death for Roman Wilson last season, because after that happened, after it felt like they just weren't on the same page for a couple weeks in a row, you saw the Steelers go out and get Adam Thielen. You saw the Steelers go out and get MVS. And all of a sudden, Roman Wilson was on the back burner again. He only had 4 receptions over the last 6 games of the 2025 season. So, yeah, to say he's in a position where the new coaching staff helps, somebody with, I think, a more complete, more robust offensive scheme helps, because they'll probably know more of what to do with Roman Wilson. But at the same time, you're in a very crowded wide receiver room that has been as good as it's been in the past 5 years, probably more. You have DK Metcalf, who's going to lead the way similar to what he did last year. But now you have Michael Pittman, who is a bona fide number 2 receiver. Remember, going into last year, the question was, well, who's the 2 behind DK Metcalf? Is it Calvin Austin? Is it Roman Wilson? Is it Scotty Miller? There was a lot of opportunity for Roman Wilson to climb up and gain those wide receiver 2 opportunities. He wasn't able to do it. It's going to be that much harder when you show up to camp behind DK Metcalf and Michael Pittman Jr. Add on the fact that they just drafted Jeremy Bernard, who a lot of people are very excited about and probably enters camp in a lot of people's eyes as the number 3 receiver. It's going to be a tough hill to climb for Roman Wilson, not just to get on the field, but to be able to be the option when he is on the field. Because even when Roman Wilson is out there, there's going to be a DK Metcalf. There's likely going to be a Michael Pittman. How is he going to become the target for Aaron Rodgers? That's a huge question mark. And then that's without even mentioning Jaylen Warren out of the backfield, Rico Dowdle out of the backfield. How about Darnell Washington, who the Steelers just gave an extension to? It's going to be difficult for players that don't have a resume or don't have momentum to be able to make an impact in this offense right away. So Roman Wilson, the way he shows up to camp, is going to be very important, in my opinion, for what his future holds with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, of these 2 players, I have more faith in Roman Wilson. If you watched Roman Wilson in college, the way he was able to play should mesh with the way that Aaron Rodgers is playing the game as it currently stands. As a 40-year-old Rodgers, he should fit well. He should mesh well with Roman Wilson. I hope to see it, because I think there's talent in there. But anytime that the head coach that drafted you, that stuck his neck out for you, that wanted you, is no longer in that position, all of a sudden it is an audition all over again for a new head coach. And that could be a good thing because it's a fresh set of eyes. There's very little preconceived notions. Or it could be a bad thing because if you struggle, this guy has no emotional attachment to you. There's nothing that has his reputation on the stake with you or at stake because of you. So it's going to be a very interesting training camp for those 2 players, 2 young offensive players that had a lot of promise coming out of the NFL draft, but have just not been able to find any momentum with the Pittsburgh Steelers over the past couple of seasons for Roman Wilson and last season for Caleb Johnson. Once again, bringing up the rear with the Pittsburgh Penguins. I do obviously talk a little bit more Pittsburgh Penguins over at Tip of the Iceberg. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Iceberg, or if you just want to listen to full episodes of that, it's actually on Nick Belsky's YouTube channel. Just go to the collaborations tab and you'll find every full episode of Tip of the Iceberg. But we are also going to bring you some different content. I'm trying to make sure that what I talk about on Burgh Breakdown is separate from what I talk about on Tip of the Iceberg. That way, if you tune in, you're not hearing repeat content. You're not hearing repeat segments. So let's talk a little bit about where the Penguins stand at this point in the offseason. They just avoided salary arbitration with restricted free agent Nick Robertson. 2 years, $3.25 million for Nick Robertson. I talked about that move and that decision extensively on Thursday's episode of Tip of the Iceberg, so I'll leave that alone for now. But with that signing, that leaves one player, one singular player unsigned for the Penguins, and that's Ville Koivunen. The question I have is, should we be worried about this? I mean, the Penguins are stacked at wing. Everybody and their mother has made that comment. Hey, look at the Penguins. They got 13, 14, 15 wingers. Like, take Sidney Crosby, and if you want to put Tommy Novak squarely in the category of center, take him, take Blake Lizotte, take Ben Kindle out of the equation. There's still 14 or 15 guys that have a genuine shot of making the opening night NHL roster at the wing position. So Ville Koivunen on the outside is going to be joining a very crowded room, per se, at the winger position. But I would still look at him as one of the better options that you have going into next season. Obviously not more than a Brian Rust or Rickard Rakell, but if you look at the bottom six and you look at who they could potentially turn to, not just on opening night, but as that first injury fill-in, there are a few players that have more offensive upside than Ville Koivunen, especially if you're looking at the prospects that are technically, quote, NHL-ready prospects. Rutger McGroarty, Avery Hayes, Tristan Brose, I like all of them, and I'm not saying they don't have offensive upside, but they don't have as much offensive upside as Ville Koivunen could potentially have going into this season. You look at what Koivunen was able to do last year. AHL, he scored 13 goals, 41 points in 34 games. Clearly, on the offensive side of the ice, he is outmatching other people with his pedigree. You look at the Calder Cup playoffs, where basically everybody on Wilkes-Barre had a hand in that run to the Eastern Conference Final, but Ville Koivunen had 4 goals, 9 points in 15 games. So right there along with a lot of the better players on the team, the higher scoring players on the team, Ville Koivunen was there making an impact. The only issue is it didn't translate to the NHL, right? We saw it at the tail end of the 2024-25 season. He got an opportunity, played in 7 games, scored 8 points. Now, they were all assists, but still, he was playing in the top 6. He looked like he fit on an NHL roster. He looked like the speed wasn't too much for him. So yeah, everybody was excited going into last season. But in 39 games, yeah, I know, it's hard to remember that he played nearly half a season with the Penguins. In 39 games, Ville Koivunen only had 7 points, only 2 goals in that time. Now, there are still 2 months to training camp, so this could be something that is resolved, who knows, potentially by the time this episode airs, before I get it edited and to you. But this isn't nothing that we've reached this point of the offseason and Ville Koivunen remains unsigned. Now, he's not arbitration eligible, so there's really no timeline between now and training camp. I guess training camp would be the timeline for them to get a deal done. It's a significant piece in my eyes because, yeah, the Penguins have some pretty talented wingers. Andrei Kuzmenko has scored 39 goals before, but at the same time, they are dart throws. And sometimes you miss when you take a chance like that. Kyle Dubas didn't miss last offseason. Justin Brazeau had a career year. You know, he hit a home run by acquiring Igor Chinikov. Parker Wotherspoon was knocked out of the park. But can you do it again? Not all the time are you going to pick up a player and he's going to be the best version of himself. It helps when you have a head coach like Dan Muse, who now has a 1-year track record of basically turning everything into gold. But there's a chance that players falter. There's a chance always that players get injured. And you need to have people that step into that role to carry the load while those initial players are injured. And Ville Koivunen has always been a player that has the talent. He just needed to put it together at the NHL level. He's great at the AHL level, but he just needs to put it together at the NHL level. I mean, if you look at potential injury replacements in the top 6, if one of those guys go down, I think I talked about it on Thursday. Yeah, Nick Robertson would be high on my list. Andrei Kuzmenko would be high on my list. But outside of those two, I'm looking at Ville Koivunen. I feel like if Ville Koivunen had an opportunity to play a little bit longer on the top line, maybe he'd gain some momentum, maybe he'd gain some confidence, and he'd play more like himself at the NHL level. If you watch what he was in 39 games at the NHL, take out the points. If you watch the style of player he was at the NHL level last year versus the style of player he was at the AHL, specifically the Calder Cup playoffs, they're two different guys. He has a confidence and almost a slight cockiness about him in the AHL, and it's because he knows he is one of the best players at that level. He needs to carry himself like that at the NHL level. You need to have a little bit of delusion if you're Ville Koivunen, because you're nerfing yourself otherwise. You're not bringing the best version of yourself. You're not giving yourself the best opportunity to hit and stick and contribute in a major way at the NHL level. So I'm hoping that's what we see. I'm hoping we see a deal get done, and I'm hoping we see Ville Koivunen start to be Ville Koivunen that everybody in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania is already familiar with. He needs to introduce that version of himself to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And if it doesn't happen, I'm not saying it was a horrendous trade, because I will never say it was a horrendous trade, because some of the pieces that are still with the organization today. But the Jake Guentzel trade just isn't aging all that well. I mean, there are some very, very good parts of that are still affecting the Penguins organization and will affect the Penguins organization for years to come. In fact, that second round pick that they got, which was a conditional first, ended up being Harrison Brunick. And that could be a top 4 right shot defenseman for you for the next decade. He is so talented. That is the crown jewel of that return as of right now. But you also got Michael Bunting, which has turned into a couple of other pretty important pieces, right? Michael Bunting gave you a good year plus. He scored some big goals. He was a fan favorite. He was somebody that you could root for a couple years. But they then turned that into Tommy Novak, who had a good year last year, who is currently your second line center, which is important when you're trying to kind of toe the line between rebuild and contention, like Kyle Dubas has. So getting Tommy Novak is great. And in fact, that could turn into more, trade tree type of stuff if the Penguins are able to find another second line center and wind up moving Tommy Novak, because there's just too much at that position then. But they also acquired Luke Schenn in the Michael Bunting trade, which didn't work out. He didn't want to stay in Pittsburgh, and that was his right. He made it known, and the Penguins did right by him. They sent him to a contender. But what did they get in return? They got a second round pick that has now turned into Marcus Ruck, who was the CHL leader in scoring last year, plus a 2027 fourth round pick that we have yet to see what they wind up doing with that. They could pick the player, and then we have to follow that player along as part of the Guentzel trade tree, or they could trade that as part of a bigger trade to get them, who knows, maybe that turns into Jason Robertson, which just takes this trade tree into a completely different direction. So there have been good. I'm not trying to say that Kyle Dubas got fleeced in that deal. But if you look at the other 4 pieces, I mean, that is 2 pieces of a 6-piece trade for the Penguins. The other 4 pieces, especially if Ville Koivunen is not back with the organization next year, it's rough to look at. The 5th round pick was not given to the Penguins because the condition was not met. The Hurricanes did not win the Stanley Cup, so they don't even get the 5th round pick. Vasily Ponomarev, who was the most NHL ready of the guys that they were able to get outside of Michael Bunting, he's now with the KHL. That didn't work out. Cruz Lucius, who is a very good prospect, and he's a rising prospect. As we found out late last season, he has not signed with the Penguins, and unless something changes, which it could, it doesn't feel like Cruz Lucius is going to sign with the Penguins. It feels like he's going to play out his college time, and he's going to sign somewhere else, similar to what the Penguins did. Did they do that with John Marino, or did he just... I'd have to go back and look at it. But Cruz Lucius, not a Penguin. And then if you add Ville Koivunen to that as well, there's questions now about that. It just makes the Jake Guentzel trade age a little bit more poorly than I think anybody would have hoped. But I'm still intrigued. We still have some time, about 2 months until the start of training camp. We have, I think, 75 days as of the day this comes out until the Penguins open the season against the Philadelphia Flyers. So plenty of time to figure something out. And for the Penguins' sake, I really hope they do, because I think there is still more to see from Ville Koivunen, and I'd prefer them see it in Pittsburgh and not in some other organization. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Burgh Breakdown. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. We'll see you guys next time.